The top stories live from the Sky News City studio. The drive to get more disadvantaged youngsters into work. I'll be speaking with Charles Woodburn, Chairman of Movement to Work and Chief Executive, of course, of BAE Systems. The Prime Minister to expand on his plans for all children to study maths until they're 18. A major summit on the future of finance kicks off in London, but has the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank dented confidence? A rally in cryptocurrencies so far this year, but challenges remain. I'll be speaking with the Chief Executive of the crypto exchange Coinbase.
Every country has a sort of soft power. We have a liquid power, a liquid and dusty power.
And the Argentinian ambassador on his country's secret weapon as it marks World Malbec Day. Good morning, this is Ian King Live, an hour of business and economic news from the heart of the city. Well, plenty of business news to come. We have a packed programme to bring you, but we're just going to briefly listen to the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, who's giving a speech on his approach to education and the importance of maths. That follows his call for all children to study maths in some form until they're 18. We're just going to listen in briefly.
Listening to this will want to know what that means for our children today. So let me tell you. We're in the process of making maths more accessible, building our children's confidence so that they don't fear maths. We're creating more sector-specific content that can excite young people about the relevance of maths for the careers that they aspire to help teachers bring maths to life in the classroom, from building sets for school plays to calculating the angles of free kicks or the speed of a Formula One car. We're extending our maths hubs, unique partnerships of expert schools that support maths teaching. And we're strengthening maths in primary schools, including with a new, fully funded professional qualification for those that are teaching it. But we also need to address...
Well, there we are. We'll leave that speech there. If you want to watch more of Rishi Sunak's speech, scan the QR code on the screen right now to head to our Politics Hub.
Where young people...
Now, today sees the start of the Innovate Finance Global Summit, a get-together of major banks, regulators, fintechs, policymakers and investors for a series of discussions on the future of finance and the banking sector. Well, they meet in the aftermath of the recent failure of Silicon Valley Bank, with which many fintechs banked. I asked Janine Hertz, the Chief Executive of Innovate Finance, whether Silicon Valley Bank's failure had changed the mood in the sector.
Well, I think the Silicon Valley Bank scenario, especially here in the UK, is really interesting, because the speed at which SVB UK was dealt with and the quick and rapid sale of SVB UK to HSBC, I think was a real testament of this government's commitment to support the fintech industry. But it was also a great example of where we see collaboration between industry, government and regulators making positive change. And it's that collaboration that I think truly sets the UK apart from all of our global peers on the international stage.
Well, that's very encouraging to hear. But what about sentiment towards London in particular among fintechs right now? I mean, I'm picking up a bit of a drumbeat that Paris is now the place to be.
Well, actually, London and the UK more broadly is definitely the place to be. We saw in 2022, and this is despite economic turbulence, more than $12.5 billion invested into the UK fintech ecosystem. That's second in the world only to the United States, and we're actually ahead of the next 13 European countries behind combined.
What about the venture capital sector right now? Clearly, it's a tougher funding environment than it has been in recent years. Are you still seeing fintechs able to raise capital where they need to?
We are, and actually it is, of course, there is a turbulent period in terms of economics at the moment, but the numbers for 2022, more investment than ever before came into UK fintech with the exception of 2021. And we do see 2021 essentially as an anomaly of a year, so we're still seeing very high levels of investment coming in.
Now, one of the other big events that's taken place over the last 6 months or so was the failure of FTX, the crypto exchange. Yes. What are you hearing about crypto right now?
Absolutely. I think where we stand at Innovate Finance and with our members is there's a real need to ensure proactive regulation and ensure that we are at the forefront of regulation more broadly. And that also applies to the crypto space, but more broadly on the fintech level overall as well. And those are one of the themes we'll be looking at in our Innovate Finance Global Summit, which is taking place today and tomorrow and throughout UK FinTech Week as well.
Are people thinking more broadly about the kind of applications that crypto might be used for now? It's less about cryptocurrency itself and more about the blockchain technology underpinning it.
Absolutely, and there was also a lot of dialogue around things like central bank digital currencies and the role of crypto and digital assets and digital finance, especially in terms of looking at how we can make a better financial services system for everyone and make it more equal and more democratic.
And what about the macro backdrop right now? Obviously, we're still in a rate tightening environment. Is that affecting the way that fintechs are approaching their work right now? Are they more focused on profitable growth rather than just, say, growth per se?
One of the most exciting areas that we're seeing fintech really progress is this opportunity to create a more equal financial services sector. So many fintechs right now are working on creating solutions that are helping individuals, that are helping SMEs better manage their finances, better understand their finances, grow their money, and really survive during this cost of living crisis.
You were quite complimentary about the UK government just now. Do you think that the regulatory environment in this country could do with improving, or is it as good as it gets for fintechs?
I do think one of the reasons we have been and continue to be such a leader in fintech is because we've historically always had a very proactive regulator. So in the light of the FCA, but also the PRA, it's absolutely critical that we continue to have that forward-thinking regulation and that proactive regulation, both to protect the consumer, but also to really enable the consumer to benefit from some of these great technologies we're seeing.
Some other business news stories for you now. And the advertising magnate Sir Martin Sorrell, one of the UK's best-known business figures, said this morning that he had recently received keyhole surgery to remove a tumour. Sir Martin, who built WPP into the world's biggest advertising company and who has since set up a new advertising and marketing group, S4 Capital, said he'd made an excellent recovery from the surgery in February, but that he had been advised to have preventative treatment over coming months. The oilfield services and engineering company John Wood Group said this morning it had agreed to open negotiations with the US private equity firm trying to buy it. Wood, which employs 35,000 people around the world, said Apollo's latest approach for it, its fifth, valued it at £1.66 billion. It said that as a result, it had decided to engage with Apollo and open its books. Wood said that Apollo had told it that it values the skills and capabilities of Wood's employees and believes the company is well positioned in its market and at the forefront of the energy transition and industrial decarbonisation. The payments provider Network International said this morning it has received a takeover proposal from a private equity consortium that values it at £2.06 billion. The approach comes from CVC Capital and Francisco Partners. Well, Network, which is based in Dubai, enables digital payments for merchants across the Middle East and Africa. When it floated on the London stock market in April 2019, it was the UK's biggest tech flotation for 4 years. But its share price has failed to recover since it was hit in 2020 by links between one of its African subsidiaries and the crashed German payments company Wirecard. Rovio, the Finnish maker of the Angry Birds mobile game, has received a takeover bid from the Japanese games publisher Sega Sammy, valuing it at €706 million. The approach comes weeks after the Israeli company Playtika sought to buy Rovio for €683 million. Well, Angry Birds was the world's first game to be downloaded more than 1 billion times and was a trailblazer when smartphones were still to be widely used. But Rovio failed to build on its success, although it did trade profitably during 2022. Now, Argentina is marking the 13th annual World Malbec Day, celebrating one of its biggest exports. The UK is Argentina's second biggest market for wine after the United States, with exports worth almost $150 million per year. Well, I've been speaking to Javier Figueroa. He's the Argentinian ambassador, about what he describes as his country's secret weapon and why he believes the UK and Argentinian economies complement each other.
Argentina is a big product as a exporter, and wine in general, is a big chunk of our exports, and particularly United Kingdom is our second market. We export here around $147 million or so, which is a record. A big chunk of this is Malbec. Malbec is a sort of a presentation card as a country. Every country has a sort of soft power. We have a liquid power, a liquid and tasty power. For many people who thought about Argentina today, thought about football here or wine.
And World Malbec Day is the 17th of April, and there's a very specific reason for that.
Yes, we decided to do that because, it's a way that is a sort of how do you put it, as a global toast, for something that is part of our culture, Say you think in Argentina, you think in the beef, and the perfect companionship for a beef is a Malbec, And, the Malbec Day is a day that is sponsored by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Wine Corporation of Argentina. And there are many, many events around the world.
And the 17th of April was the day that the first vines were brought to Argentina.
Yeah, exactly. It was, it's a merit. It's a big president of Argentina. It's called Domingo Faustino Sarmiento. Is one of the big modernizers of Argentina. And one of these writers' idea, a part of the public education. Argentina have a public education, and we are very proud of that. Argentina universities are free. And one of the things that they bring Malbec to Argentina, particularly to the province of Mendoza. And on that moment, it was a paradox, because when Malbec was not so popular in Europe, it began to be, big things in America.
You've just had a terrible drought in Argentina. Yeah. That has presumably badly hit a lot of the wine producers.
Yes, it is. It's a trouble, but, I think that the industry, I think they have ways to overcome the droughts. I think that, for example, Mendoza is a very dry area, and you have a very good system, to irrigate the vineyards. But indeed, it's a problem, and it is a problem for the whole agro industry worldwide.
And how are the producers grappling with inflation, which is obviously, we complain about inflation in this country, but it's a real issue in Argentina right now?
Well, let's see, we get used to that, And the most of the producer of the product of the industry is going abroad, and, they get used to the instabilities of the economy. I think one of the ways that Argentina could, overcome the economic difficulties is growing its export. And I think wine is the best example for the rest of the economy. I think the Argentine industry modernized a lot in the last 20 years or so. My first post abroad was here in London. And I remember at that time it was very, very difficult to find Argentine wine in a restaurant or in a supermarket. And today it's everywhere.
I think I'm right in saying, though, that trade between the UK and Argentina has just hit an all-time high in terms of the volumes.
Yes, that is historical records in our commerce. We export more than $1 billion, almost $5 billion, and we import around 1/3 of that sum. And this is a record. In general, Latin America is not very important as a trading partner of the UK, but Argentina is important in this universe, And I think there is a lot of way to improve that. We don't have sailing in our commerce, Last few months come our Minister of Energy, and there is really, really huge interest in oil and gas and, and mining as well. Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile is the lithium triangle. This is the biggest, reservoir of lithium in the world. And there is a sort of frenzy regarding that, how to develop that. And for us, it's a challenge.
But it's very, very interesting, though, because most people, if they think about Argentina's economy, they do think of you as an agricultural powerhouse. But the fact that you're now exporting energy in considerable volumes, lithium potentially as well, the economy is going to be a lot more diverse in years to come.
Well, Argentina have a very diverse structure. We have a very strong industrial base. And, for example, we export nuclear reactors. We export nuclear reactors to Australia, we are now building one in the Netherlands, and Argentina produce and export satellites. One of the leading firms in the world in microsatellites in an Argentine firms. And we have another big firm that is owned by one of the provinces of Buenos Aires that produce, this big nuclear reactor for research and produce isotopes and these sort of things. The images for Argentina, many times, me as an ambassador, and many ambassadors who had to fight against stereotypes, Even we Argentinians, we really don't know what we country have. For example, many people associate Argentina with meat, but we export more fish than meat since 20, 30 years, or we export creative industries, That is, I think it's a big, opportunity that have my country to develop.
So how big can the trade between the UK and Argentina become?
Well, it is, I think we can double that figure. I think I am pretty optimistic on that. Is it possible to double that figure? Because the economies are so complementary. I think that that is possible to improve. And one thing that we need to improve is the knowledge between societies, and because many times in Argentina, when if I pick up one Argentinian in the street and say, how do you think that is of UK? And they have an image of UK that is fixed in the past.
And obviously you've just won the World Cup. I think people in England have just about forgiven you for the hand of God in 1986.
Well, I hope so. But you have to remember the second goal of Maradona. Yeah. That was great. It was really, really great. I remember, I think it was a writing piece. I think it was a Lineker that he wrote when Maradona died a couple of years ago. And he mentioned that the first goal was, a little tricky, but the second goal was, a masterwork, really, really. And for us it was, imagine the happiness of Argentina when we won the World Cup,
Would you like to see more British tourists in Argentina?
Yes, indeed. Well, one of the problems that we don't have enough airlines. Today it's only British Airways who is flying a direct flight, but we are talking with other companies to try to gain more, more airlinks to Buenos Aires. I know that the British tourist is, per capita, the tourists that the most spend money in my country, because it's a very high-end tourist. They go to fly fishing to Patagonia, and they go to wine tasting to the Andes, and yes, we expect to have more airlinks, and fortunately, I expect more British tourists as well.
While the UK unemployment rate currently stands at just 3.7%, the unemployment rate for 16 to 24-year-olds is 10.8%, while the inactivity rate, that's those not in education, employment or training, stands at 38.2%. Well, the charity Movement to Work was set up to tackle that state of affairs. It seeks to help young people not currently in education, employment or training step onto the career ladder by working with UK employers to provide quality jobs, training and work placement opportunities. Today marks its 10th anniversary, and it's hosting a CEO conference to get more companies to support its work. Well, joining me now is the charity's new chair, Charles Woodburn, who is, of course, also Chief Executive of BAE Systems. Charles, very good morning to you. Why do you think inactivity levels are so high for this group?
Well, it's been quite a challenging period, Ian, and as you said, it is something that we as businesses feel very strongly about, and anything we can do to help get people into workplaces, give them the placement opportunities, which then hopefully will lead to successful outcomes. We as a company have been one of the founding members of Movement to Work. I personally have been involved since 2017, and we've seen the people that have come through Movement to Work. I meet them as I go around our UK businesses and see how well they're doing. They flourish with us. They come in typically for a placement, that becomes a bridge into an apprenticeship, and then from an apprenticeship into the workplace, and high quality, long-term employment awaits at the end of it. So we have had a very strong experience with Movement to Work, a very positive experience. And part of the reason I feel so passionate about it is that I want to make sure that other companies understand that there is an answer to some of these challenges that these young people are facing.
Are employers doing a good enough job in engaging with youth employment programmes?
Well, I think there's quite a variety of them, and we certainly think that Movement to Work stands tall within that. Movement to Work has actually offered 160,000 opportunities since it was founded 10 years ago, and more than half of those have led to successful outcomes. So, that's a very large number of people that have used the opportunity. And we're very keen to make sure that, other companies are aware of the success of Movement to Work, aware of the program, the fact that it doesn't cost anything to join Movement to Work. We support the young people. They get their transport and their lunches paid for when they do a placement with us, and really to try and reduce the barriers that some of these young people face to find their way into a workplace and ultimately a high quality long-term employment at the end of it.
Your company, BAE Systems, requires heavily on very, very highly skilled workers. Can someone on a work placement really add much value? Can they pick up a lot in a short space of time?
Well, I think that the evidence is there. I mean, we as a company, through Movement to Work, have had 700 placements in the last 10 years. We're offering another 100 this year. And as I've said already, as I go around our businesses, I quite often meet people that are very proud to say that they started on a Movement to Work placement. And, whilst the placement itself is really a bridge into an apprenticeship, I always think that placements, they allow us as a company to see, how people work in the place of work, but equally they allow those who are enjoying the placement to see what we are like as an employer and make a much more educated decision. So it is a first step on a pathway, but coming into our apprentice programs, and as you know, we have a very strong apprentice program here in the UK. We've increased our apprentice numbers, but getting onto an apprentice program then really is the first step or the second step after the placement into long-term employment.
Now, as we speak, the Prime Minister's giving a speech on how he wants people to carry on studying maths right up until the age of 18. Do you think that's a good idea?
Well, from our perspective, we're an engineering company at its heart, and STEM, or at least numeracy skills, are indeed very important for us. So we firmly would support more numeracy and a higher standard coming out of our schools.
Is the education system in this country equipping young people sufficiently for the kind of careers that the modern economy is providing them with?
Well, I think there has been in the last handful of years, I think, a more of an appreciation of what apprenticeships can really offer. And I think that we've been, as a company, trying to make sure that people understand that. There's always been this sort of view at school age that the graduate route was in a sense the only way into quality employment. And apprenticeships offer an incredibly strong alternative, particularly at a time of cost of living crises and some of the challenges of inflation, where you can come into the workplace. In many cases, people can come through an apprenticeship and indeed get a degree at the end of it. Not all of them will do that, but without debt, and then with a job at the end of it. And I think that the more we can do as employers to sort of demonstrate that is not only just an alternative, but a very good alternative to the standard graduate track, I think it behoves all of us to make sure that young people see the importance of that, see the significance of it. And I think for us as a company, we do a very good job in the places that are close to our large centres of employment. But I think nationally, there's more we can do to raise the profile of apprenticeships.
And Charles, while we have you, there's been a lot of talk in the recent past about potentially the defence sector being deprived of capital because some investors won't invest on ESG grounds. Do you feel that the war in Ukraine has shifted sentiment among investors towards the defence sector?
I think it's fair to say that it is shifting. There is still some way to go. We've always maintained that ESG and ESG considerations are important, but all of that requires the foundation of defence and security. And without defence and security, it's very hard to give any credibility to the other aspects of ESG. So Obviously, I mean, unfortunately, due to the conflict here in Europe, in the brutal invasion of Ukraine, I think that the sort of the case for defence and security, has been more clearly made. I think, within all of that, it's then important for us to show as an employer the steps that we're taking to be a good place to work, that we look after the environment, the net zero things that we're doing. So they're all important considerations. But as a foundation, defence and security, has to be what modern democracies, freedom of speech, all the things that we take for granted are based upon.
All right, Charles, we have to leave it there. Really good to see you this morning, and best of luck with the events. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Still to come here on Ian King Live, we'll have a look at how global markets are doing this Monday morning. Don't go away.
And now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that the boat seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world.
I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
The biggest party Tripoli has ever seen.
That's it. It got us then.
There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits going in still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news. Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at her arms. I can put my entire hand round. This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Mother Nature can be vicious, absolutely savage. The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Oh!
Close and personal with her, aren't I?
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
Well, stock markets in the Asia-Pacific region had a largely positive session overnight, with both Hong Kong and Shanghai finishing ahead by more than 1% apiece. That's ahead of a raft of economic data this week. The Nikkei in Tokyo, meanwhile, completed a 7th consecutive gain. That's its longest winning streak since July last year. Well, in Europe, stocks are largely ahead this morning. Here's the picture in continental Europe. Not many individual features for investors to hang their hats on this morning. In London, the FTSE 100 is also just about in positive territory, currently some 39 points to the good, half of 1% higher. That's on the back of gains for some of the mining heavyweights. The leading blue chip gainer in percentage terms right now, though, is the distributor RS Group. The share's up some 2.25% right now on broker comment. Outside the FTSE, the industrial machinery maker Renault is up 11% on a trading update, while the defence technology group Kinetic is ahead by some 4.25%. That's on news that profits for the year will be better than expected. Meanwhile, International Distribution Services, its shares are up some 5%. That's after its Royal Mail arm reached a pay deal with the Communication Workers Union. Meanwhile, Network International, which I mentioned earlier on, they're ahead 18% on that takeover approach, and Wood Group, which also mentioned earlier, is ahead by some 7% for similar reasons. On the foreign exchange markets, well, the US dollar has strengthened following resilient retail sales figures that have raised expectations of another US interest rate rise next month. The pound is off by 0.25% against the dollar. It's off by 0.1% against a single currency. The euro, meanwhile, also off by 0.25% against the greenback. As for the oil price, well, after notching up another week of gains last week, it's a little bit quieter this morning. A barrel of Brent crude will currently set you back $85.92 a barrel. That is off a little under 0.5% on the session. Well, joining me now is Russ Mould. He's Investment Director at AJ Bell. Russ, good to see you this morning. A lot of interesting bid situations around the mid-caps right now. Is this just because valuations are so low?
I mean, in the end, valuation, the price you pay, is the ultimate arbiter of investment return, so long as you think the business is pretty sound. So the fact that you've had a UK stock market underperform for many years, we've discussed before, and you still got a currency that's below where it was in June 2016 before the Brexit vote, so for an overseas buyer, that's an added bonus. So an unloved stock market can mean undervalued, unloved currency can mean undervalued, and that's what's attracting the money. And these bids, I think, are both from private equity companies out there where we know there's still a lot of money sloshing around.
Absolutely. Would you expect to see more takeover activity in the mid-cap sector in particular?
I think, in fairness, there have been 12 FTSE 100 companies taken over since the Brexit vote in 2016. Sky being one of them, I seem to remember a few years ago. That was one of the first out of the traps. There was Arm, Shire, Sky, went very quickly. Then others have followed, Aveva, Megit, GKN. Not all to overseas buyers, not all to private equity buyers, but the majority of them. So I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest, quite frankly. Fund managers may not be very interested in UK equities, but somebody is, and maybe that's a lesson that we could learn.
Absolutely. Well, and certainly with a lot of the trading updates that we've had sparking some quite high upward valuations.
Yeah, I mean, Kinetic's an interesting example today. I mean, they've had a bit of a tricky time. There was one contract, a big contract, where they call it the complex contract, that cost them about £15 million. They're still a bit coy about who it was with and where, because they're still working out a settlement. But even if you look through that, underlying trading was actually pretty good, and now they're coming out of that, trading very, very strong indeed. Again, maybe reflection of the times in which we live, increasing defence budgets, increasing global security concerns, cyber security concerns, but it's in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, now another one that's caught your eye this morning, an update to Page Group, the recruitment company.
Yeah, and this is interesting because obviously employment numbers are still looking incredibly good. Unemployment rate very low in the UK, very low in the US. Even by European standards, it's not bad there either. They're much higher than they would be here. And it's just intriguing to see that the big double-digit percentage increases we saw in fees last year, they've eased right off. So there's a slight drop in first quarter fees year on year. The company's flagging a move, preference that employs to temporary rather than permanent contracts, which again reflects a bit of an economic uncertainty, and some candidates apparently holding off signing on the dotted line. So it just does suggest that even one of the strongest economic indicators we've had might be showing a little bit of signs of weakness.
Yeah, now later on today, big event for the bond market, more developments on the US debt ceiling debate.
Yeah, this is Speaker Kevin McCarthy talking at the New York Stock Exchange about the US debt ceiling. There's a settlement needed by June or July, and this is probably bringing back some bad memories for bond, currency and stock traders from 2011 when there wasn't a settlement reached, and then Standard & Poor's took the very brave decision of downgrading US debt. And I think the Dow, the day after, promptly fell 600, 700, 800 points, where it had one of its then worst days on record. So the political angle, the Republicans, Democrats are setting out their stall for November 2024, but economically, they won't want to do something silly that means that the US borrowing costs go higher, because if you've got $31.5 billion in debt, as you do, they're already paying $800 million a year in interest, and that's when interest rates were really low, and now they're catching up. Your tax income's $5 trillion, so if your interest rate keeps on going up, then that's less money for welfare or defence, so they are going to have to find a solution.
Yeah, absolutely. Only 800 million, like that.
Sorry, yes, only.
Only. Good to see you, Russ. Thank you. Still to come here on Ian King Live, I'm going to be speaking with the co-founder and chief executive of Coinbase about the challenges still faced by the world of crypto. Don't go away. Welcome back. Cryptocurrencies have rallied this year with the price of Bitcoin and Ethereum almost doubling since early January, but it remains a tough environment for crypto exchanges since the collapse in November of FTX. The market leader Binance is currently being sued by the Commodity Futures Trading Commission amid allegations it has been operating illegally in the US, while its rival Coinbase recently announced it's to cut a fifth of its workforce, and it reached a $100 million settlement with New York regulators over anti-money laundering failures. Well, joining me now is Brian Armstrong. He's co-founder and chief executive of Coinbase. Brian, good to see you this morning.
Likewise.
What sort of activity have you seen on the exchange since prices started to rally?
Well, we have seen a resurgence in interest in crypto, as you mentioned. I think, Bitcoin's up almost 71% year to date, which is good. And perhaps the most exciting thing about it, though, is that we're still seeing a lot of developer activity. That, to me, is the most exciting thing because, trading is a big use case for crypto, but the potential of it is much bigger than that. It's really a technology to update the financial system in all aspects, and then a way for people to build new applications on the internet, which people are calling Web3. So, that's a long-term vision, and we're committed to getting there over a long period of time.
What do you think's driven this rally in crypto values?
I always hate to sort of play Monday morning quarterback and look back and try to, look, a lot of things. The market came down. Interest rates, obviously, is a factor. I think some of these bank issues that we've seen with SVB and things like that have caused people to sort of question, is the traditional financial system serving my needs, or is there another system that's outside of the banking system that people want to actually hold some wealth in? So that's one reason, but the market is very complex, lots of participants.
You've been very vocal on the need to improve consumer confidence in the industry. Do you think regulation is coming?
I do. In fact, the UK has been a bit of a leader here. I've been really admiring the leadership from Rishi Sunak and the city minister here in London. And I think the UK, 5 years ago, created this regulatory sandbox. That was actually very ahead of its time. So there's a lot more that needs to happen in the UK, but so far the steps there have been very positive. In the US, actually, the US has been a little bit of an outlier here. It's been not as forward-leaning on regulation. And we've spent a lot of time in DC, I have as well, trying to make sure that good, comprehensive crypto legislation gets passed in the US, kind of like we're seeing in Europe with MiCA.
A lot of people would argue, though, that how can you regulate an industry like crypto when assets like Bitcoin, Ethereum are so deregulated? There isn't a sort of central player like the Bank of England or the Federal Reserve that can sort of hold things together.
Yeah. Well, I think the centralized players in crypto, the exchanges, the custodians, companies like Coinbase, those should be regulated. The decentralized aspects of crypto, which include, Bitcoin, Ethereum, even this thing, DeFi, those should not be regulated, not as financial services at least, right? In my view, that's where we need to have a lot of innovation, but go regulate the centralized players. And a lot of the best practices from traditional financial services can be applied here. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, It's about having good customer disclosures, having audits, making sure no wash trading is happening, just basic good financial controls like that. That's what MiCA's done, and that's what I think other countries are going to do as well.
I think you've outlawed wash trading, I think, on the platform, haven't you?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. What about this Wells notice that you received from the SEC recently? When do you expect to hear more on that?
Right. Well, so just to give people background, it's unfortunate. We've spent a long period of time, really over the last 10 months, we spent maybe 30 meetings with the SEC, never got any feedback from them about what we could be doing better, even though we've asked for it. We filed a petition on it. And then, of course, they even allowed us to become a public company in the US, so they reviewed our business very thoroughly during that process. So it was really disappointing to see this Wells notice arrive. And it's basically, in the US, the SEC is creating this environment of regulation by enforcement. We've repeatedly asked them, we just want to have a clear rule book. If you publish the rules and we'll follow them, and we'd be happy to. But if there's not a clear rule book, why are there enforcement actions arriving? So anyway, the Wells notice arrived. I think we have a chance to respond in maybe a week or something like that, and we'll see where it goes. But we're prepared to defend ourselves in court. We feel like we're well within the rule of law.
And this is around your staking services where crypto assets are tied up. You're going to carry on with that service, presumably.
Well, what's interesting is the SEC has not actually even really told us specifically what it's about still to this date. They've mentioned in other meetings concerns about staking and various other things. But yeah, we're planning to continue our staking service, and we feel very confident it's not a security.
Is that something that's popular among users?
Yeah, it has been a popular service. I mean, people want to find a way to participate in staking services, and it's one of many aspects of where crypto can kind of help update the financial system.
Now, the last time we spoke, which was down the line, was shortly after the collapse of FTX. How much of a headache has that created for you and your business?
Well, I'd say in the U.S., when I go to D.C., it's still very top of mind for people there because, Sam was so present in D.C. and some of them feel very burned by it. But outside of the U.S., when I meet with people in the U.K. or Singapore or Hong Kong, other financial hubs, FTX doesn't really come up very much. It mostly feels like that's a distant memory. People have turned the page, and in fact, they're actually trying to attract companies to come build in those markets, which I think is the right approach. So, yeah, I think I would like us to be able to turn the page on that, and the U.S. needs to follow suit as well.
But presumably it's good news for you in a sense, in that it gives you an opportunity to sort of come out and say, look, we are completely different. We are not the same as those guys.
That's right. I mean, that's what I did in the weeks after it collapsed, was just kind of, and including speaking with you, was to reinforce that message to people. And it's unfortunate. There's a few bad actors in crypto for sure. I mean, our industry unfortunately has attracted some folks like that. But it gets a disproportionate amount of headlines compared to how many companies are really building in a trusted and legitimate way, including Coinbase.
All right, Brian, got to leave it there. Great to see you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Time now for a look at this morning's business pages, and the Financial Times leads its print edition with the report that the Bank of England is considering a major overhaul of its deposit guarantee scheme, which could include an increase in the amount to which the deposits of business customers are guaranteed. The FT's digital edition, meanwhile, is currently leading with a related story that global regulators are considering imposing tougher rules on smaller lenders and requiring all banks to ready themselves for faster runs on deposits. Well, the Times leads its business pages with criticism of the CBI for its decision to turn to insiders to steer it through misconduct allegations. The paper also reports that the Power League five-a-side football chain has been put up for sale by its private equity owner with a £60 million price tag. Daily Telegraph, meanwhile, leads its business pages with a report quoting research that nearly 500,000 amateur landlords are set to sell up during the next 5 years as the baby boom generation retires and cashes in its nest eggs. The paper also reports that the Welsh Government has been stuck with a portfolio of 31 homes that were compulsorily purchased in order to make way for Relief Road near the Severn Bridge, and that road has since been cancelled. Now, today sees publication of the UK aviation industry's carbon roadmap, in which it sets out how it hopes to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Well, central to that will be greater uptake of sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, which is made of renewable waste and residue raw materials like used cooking oil. It will also involve joining regional and international carbon trading and offsetting schemes. Well, joining me now is the chair of the Sustainable Aviation Coalition, Matt Gorman. Matt, good to see you this morning. I mean, the problem that we have with SAF in this country is we don't have the sort of capability to make it quickly enough, it seems.
Well, we don't yet, but with the right commitment by the industry and the right action by government, we're saying we absolutely can. So what we're launching today is a clear plan to take the carbon out of flying through efficiencies and hydrogen, as well as sustainable aviation fuel. But you're right, sustainable aviation fuel is about 40% of the solution. Secondly, we're saying it's not just a decarbonisation opportunity, but it's a huge economic opportunity for the UK as well. Thousands of jobs, billions of investment possible. But we are saying that kind of opportunity is at risk without urgent action by government. So the government set a great ambition for Jet Zero. What we now need is the policies at speed, because other countries, particularly the US, are moving ahead to corner the market in these technologies.
Now, there's an implicit cost in all of this, both for the industry and for customers. Can you put a number on it?
Well, what we've said is that, yes, there is some cost. Actually, 75% of our journey to net zero will happen through some of these technologies within the sector. But we're saying that there's some cost. And actually, we've built that into the projections, which show slightly lower demand in future as a result of this. About 14% of our journey to net zero comes through lower demand. But actually, we're saying even with those costs, people still want to fly. All of the evidence shows people value flying. They're prepared to pay a bit more. And actually, they'll be investing in these green technologies of the future.
You did mention demand there, Matt, and the industry is quite clear that the extra costs are going to deter some people from flying in future. Can you put a figure on that, perhaps?
Well, we've always been open, actually, that and clear as a sector that people, the industry, and ultimately passengers should pay the carbon costs of their travel. So, as I said, we're saying if you look at our whole journey to net zero, 75% of that comes from efficiency and sustainable aviation fuel and hydrogen. We're saying about 14% of it comes from slightly lower demand in future, and the rest is from removing any carbon that's left. But the good news is, all of the evidence is people value travel. They're prepared to pay a bit more, and in paying a little bit more, they will be investing in these green technologies of the future, which ultimately will let us take the carbon out of flying so that we can carry on enjoying what air travel brings us.
Wouldn't a better way of reducing emissions be by more effective demand management? For example, letting the train take the strain on some short-haul journeys instead of flying?
Well, we think there's huge value in air travel, and it connects us around the world, supports some of what we most enjoy doing as humans, connecting, exploring, cooperating, trading around the world. So we're saying, look, if the technology is there to let us take the carbon out, why wouldn't we do that? Particularly as it brings benefits to the UK. And what we're saying is sustainable fuel, efficiency, hydrogen, the technology is there. We've just got to move quickly to scale it up. In the UK, yes, where train travel is competitive in terms of time and cost, people may well choose the train. But overall, that won't substitute some of the European and particularly longer journeys that we do.
All right, Matt, got to leave it there. Appreciate you joining me today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, recent advances by drug giants such as AstraZeneca in therapy areas such as oncology have highlighted the importance of so-called precision medicine. That's tailoring a specific drug to individual patient groups dependent on their molecular or genetic makeup. Well, Belfast-based Diaceutics supports this work by supplying diagnostic testing data to the drug developers. Today, it reported a 22% rise in full-year pre-tax profits to £564,000 as sales rose by 40% to £19.5 million. Well, joining me now is Nick Roberts. He's Chief Financial Officer at Diaceutics. Nick, welcome to you. Where's demand for diagnostic testing data strongest right now?
So we're finding it strongest in the pharmaceutical sector, and that's our key customer base. So we work with 21 of the top 30 global pharma companies and 20 of the top pharma companies within Europe and the US. And we're finding that the biggest demand coming from those pharma customers is around oncology. That's where we have historically specialized in, but are looking to expand out into non-oncology areas and rare diseases. And we think these are going to be some of the high growth areas for precision medicine over the coming decade or so.
Where are the therapy areas where it's hardest right now to collect diagnostic data?
Yeah, so we focus on collecting diagnostic data from our unique lab network. We capture that within our platform, and we have this huge testing repository. We think we've actually overcome the challenges that we might see from some of our competitors in collecting that data, because we have a very wide collection of affiliate labs that we can tap into. That's throughout the US, where we have a really strong, robust supply chain. A growing supply chain throughout labs in Europe. And again, we have good coverage. We have excellent coverage really in oncology, but it's starting to grow into other areas. And these are where we think are going to be the high growth areas in the future. So we think we've managed to really secure our supply chain through our unique lab network, which has taken, a good long while to build out.
So when a pharma client comes to you and says, we'd like this particular set of data, what sort of lead time do you require? How quickly can you turn around a request like that?
Very quickly. So if we haven't got the data ready, it's most likely in our repository, and it's a case of asking our data analytics team to work with that and extract it. So we can talk in a matter of an hour or so to turn around that data. If we didn't have that data, for whatever reason that might be, we have this really strong lab network. We can reach out to them and could turn around a request probably within a matter of weeks.
And in terms of how you get paid, I noticed in the statement today, I think something like 35% of revenue is now from subscriptions. Presumably that is the way that you'd like to take the business.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen a huge shift to subscription, really driven post-COVID by pharma's propensity to move to more digital channels. So they're quite welcoming of the move to platform enabled and to subscription. It's gone up from 3% in 2021 to 35% in 2022. We are looking to invest in our strategy, actually accelerate our investment in our strategy. And one of the key things that we want to see come out of that in the end is a higher proportion of our revenue, which is subscription-based, which gives us a lot more visibility and stability over our revenues, but also multi-year. So we've seen a 9-fold increase in our order book from 1.7 million at the end of 2022 to over 16.9 million at the end of 2022, and that's giving us really good visibility of revenue into future years.
You spoke just now, Nick, about your lab testing network around the world. What are the specific factors that would lead you to use a specific site when you're dealing with a data request? Is it all about patients in a certain country, or is there more to it than that?
That's certainly part of it. We need to make sure that we have the right level of patient coverage within that geography. So typically for a disease, we want to have at least 60% patient coverage of that disease within the geography, whether that be, let's say, a state in the US or a country within Europe. But of course, we're looking to make sure that we've got coverage in all of the right diseases. So we will go and pick labs who are best serving the testing needs. We collect that data from those labs, and we can then pick those labs to make sure that they're giving the right data, the right representation of the testing landscape for pharma to be able to exploit and better commercialize their medicines. In the end, getting better return on investment for the drug they're launching.
Now, before I let you go, Nick, you're looking nice and relaxed this morning, but you had, I think, $20 million worth on deposit with Silicon Valley Bank when it went under last month. You must have had a few sleepless nights.
No, you're absolutely right. There were a few sleepless nights that weekend. We had a large concentration of our cash with SVB. We finished our year with 19.8 million in cash. It's a really strong position. We have very quickly pivoted to introduce alternative banking institutions. We've diversified our cash now across those. So we now have, alongside SVB and HSBC under one umbrella, we have another 2 tier 1 financial institutions that we've now deposited our cash reserves in, so that we have access to those, just recognizing that the banking sector still is going through some trouble, and we don't want to be exposed to that any further.
All right, Nick, got to leave it there. Good to see you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we're going to go back to now what we began the programme with, which is the Prime Minister has been expanding on his ambitions for children to continue learning maths in some form until they're 18. Well, listening to the speech was our political editor, Beth Rigby, who joins me now. Beth, how's the speech gone down?
Well, Ian, we know that this is a very numerate Prime Minister. He worked in hedge funds and in the city before he went into politics. He's a dab hand at making a spreadsheet, and he really prizes numeracy and mathematical ability. And the thrust of this speech was to try and cascade that, if you like, to the whole of the country. He talked about maths being taught until between 16 and 18, so beyond GCSE. He said that didn't necessarily mean kids needed to study A-level maths, but could they find a way of making sure, just with literacy, that numeracy became really core to learning. And he talked about a review in which they're going to look how to do that. He talked about building more maths hubs, and he talked about more qualifications for primary school teachers when it came to maths. But look, the big elephant in the room there, Ian, when he talked about this ambition for maths, is the reality of kids in state schools across the UK. He said it himself that in England and Wales only a third of children fail maths GCSEs, and we know that in state schools in England and Wales, nearly half of maths teachers are non-specialised in maths, which really goes back to the basics of education, and not about whether this is a cultural issue, which is what the Prime Minister talked about us being an anti-maths mindset in this country, but rather was it a provision issue, and he acknowledged that the government needed to do more and make this a more integrated policy. But I think the sort of ambition was there. I think it's where the rubber meets the road in terms of the reality of what state school kids in places like this in Islington in North London are experiencing in the classrooms.
And Beth, obviously the PM's grappling with some very heavy public sector strikes, particularly in the NHS. Has he had anything to say on that this morning?
Well, exactly, and that was another area of questions. There's already been 6 teachers' strikes this year, a couple more planned. And as you said, the Royal College of Nurses say that their members have not accepted the government's pay offer. And now there is the prospects of nurses' strikes running into Christmas. The Prime Minister obviously asked about that. He says he's disappointed that public sector workers haven't accepted the deals, but hopes to find a way through. But I'm afraid, Ian, for now, no more detail.
All right, Beth, thanks for that. Much more on that story coming up throughout the morning here on Sky News. After this, it's Jane Secker. Do stay tuned. I'll join you at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Cheerio.